So, how exactly do you counter a rising superpower without, triggering a catastrophic open conflict? It's pretty much the ultimate geopolitical chess match of the 21st century. I mean, imagine sharing a massive, highly contested land border with a nuclear-armed neighbor, while at the exact same time, you're competing for dominance across the vast expanse of the world's most critical oceans. How do you push back, protect your interests, and build your own power without accidentally crossing that tripwire into an all-out war? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the incredibly high-stakes rivalry between India and China. We're going to look at exactly how India is executing a massive strategic maritime surge alongside a really calculated diplomatic dance to counterbalance Chinese influence. So let's dive right in and see how New Delhi is essentially rewriting the playbook on modern geopolitical competition. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the Himalayan flashpoint, move into the Indo-Pacific pivot, break down the logic of zone balancing, contrast diamonds against pearls, and finally look at the economic balancing act. All right, part one, the Himalayan flashpoint. Recent climate and security data are showing us this really strong warming trend in the incredibly harsh western border region, and it is fundamentally altering the security landscape up there. Melting ice and warmer temperatures are actually increasing the viability of military patrols in areas that used to be totally inaccessible for a huge chunk of the year. So it's quite literally heating up the potential for violent clashes. And those clashes, they're incredibly real. The 2020 Galwan Valley clash was a brutal wake-up call that resulted in the deaths of 20 Indian and at least 4 Chinese soldiers, which really followed the fragility we already saw exposed by the 2017 Doklam standoff. But it's not just troops on the ground. Climate change is actively raising the risk of downstream flooding in the Brahmaputra basin. You couple that with China's lack of transparency regarding its dam projects, and well, you have an environment that is perfectly engineered for deep mutual distrust. Which brings us to part two, the Indo-Pacific pivot. To really gain a strategic advantage, India had to look to the oceans. Think about the Quad: India, the US, Japan, and Australia. It started pretty loosely back in 2004 just for tsunami relief coordination, but it was revived in 2017 amid growing maritime concerns, and today it has expanded dramatically. By 2024, the Quad launched the Ports of the Future Initiative and Sea Observer missions. This is directly aimed at balancing Chinese maritime influence, not just in the Indian Ocean, but stretching all the way into the East China Sea. They are building serious joint maritime capability, but they're doing it without overt militarization. And that brings us to the absolute core concept of this explainer. Strategic analyst Arjun Tarpur hit the nail on the head when he said, India's involvement in the Quad is best understood not as an act of military containment, but as a form of zone balancing. India isn't trying to build an Asian NATO to just directly fight China, it's doing something much more subtle. Let's unpack that in part three, the logic of zone balancing. So, what actually is zone balancing? Well, it's all about shaping the regional environment. It's building the capacity of smaller states, reinforcing international norms, and creating this resilient network so that China's coercive economic and military tools are effectively blunted. And the genius of it is that India achieves this without fully bandwagoning with the US. They maintain their strategic autonomy and avoid outright confrontation with Beijing. So how does India actually execute this on the ground? By engaging heavily in non-military domains and securing key maritime choke points. Under its Sagar vision, India is partnering on things like undersea cables, 5G security networks, and regional digital infrastructure. It's a way to indirectly limit Chinese influence, making the region essentially too strong for any single power to easily dominate. Moving on to part four, diamonds against pearls. On one side of the board, you have China's string of pearls strategy. This is an encircling network of infrastructure and ports, like water in Pakistan and Hambung Toda in Sri Lanka. But to counter this, India has developed what's called a necklace of diamonds. Beyond getting strategic access to ports like Chabahar in Iran and Duqm in Oman, India is executing a massive strategic maritime surge to literally monitor global trade choke points. We're talking about the huge militarization and infrastructure project on Great Nicobar Island, and the joint development of Sabang port with Indonesia right at the mouth of the critical Strait of Malacca. But hey, a necklace is only as good as the string connecting it, right? So India's building massive connectivity alternatives. There's the IMEC, the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, which is designed to directly rival China's trans-regional ambitions. There's the INSTC, linking Mumbai up to Moscow. Out at sea, you have the Malabar naval exercises really enhancing interoperability among the Quad navies. And simultaneously back at home, India managed to complete 90 massive border roads projects by 2024 just to ensure they aren't caught flat-footed on land. They're hedging their bets on literally all fronts. Finally, Part 5, the Economic Balancing Act. $100 billion. That is India's massive trade deficit with China right now. To put that into perspective, this is the central paradox of this entire explainer. Because despite all the border clashes, all the naval posturing, all the geopolitical rivalry, their economies are deeply structurally intertwined. Total economic decoupling? It's incredibly difficult, if not flat out impossible in the short term. So how do you handle a vulnerability that huge? Well, India is executing a hardcore strategy of economic resilience. They are leveraging the global China Plus One trend to attract supply chains that are moving out of China. They've launched the Atmanirbhar Bharat, or self-reliance, push, literally injecting $26 billion into production-linked incentive schemes across 14 vital sectors just to reduce import dependence. And, acting strictly in its own strategic interest, India secured heavily discounted Russian oil, saving a staggering $17 billion. That's a massive buffer for its domestic economy against global shocks. What all of this boils down to is a state of very pragmatic coexistence. Despite the intense friction we've talked about, both nations still sit at the exact same table in organizations like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They've resumed border trade at specific passes, and remarkably, at a meeting in Tianjin in August 2025, leaders actually went so far as to label their ties as partners, not rivals. It's strategic hedging at its absolute finest, competing fiercely in the shadows while preventing a total geopolitical fracture in public. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly pressing question. Can a delicately balanced multipolar Asia truly remain stable? Look, India is walking a geopolitical tightrope here. They're balancing the Quad against BRICS, maritime expansion against border defense, and economic dependence against strategic autonomy. It is a masterful, super intricate dance of zone balancing. But in a world that is heating up, both literally and politically, will this delicate balance hold, or will it eventually falter? Thank you so much for joining me on this